morning.
Good morning.
Nice to be back after 3 weeks. My voice is still a little bit gravelly, but I'm not contagious. So. That hymn is my favorite hymn. It's beautiful. Music by John Sibelius and the words by the Reverend Samuel Walker. And he died in 2009. So I can't give a proper thanks to either the Reverend Walker or John Sibelius, but I can pay it forward. John Andrew Barnes III, a soldier in the Vietnam War, threw himself on a live grenade to save several of his wounded buddies. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. There are several similar accounts on the internet, and we've all heard accounts of persons falling on the tracks in a train station and a stranger quickly jumping in to help the person back on the platform before the next train arrives. These acts represent perhaps the highest form of altruism, which is at the core of the evolution of morality. Were these acts of heroes, or were these acts long ago programmed in us by evolution, and which cause us to act impulsively in crises that don't allow enough time for rational thought? Consensus of evolutionary psychologists would be that we're hardwired for sacrifice. In most non-military cases, the action is not suicidal, as it is usually when a soldier falls on a grenade. Thus, evolution has mindlessly calculated the genetic survival odds, and risking one individual to potentially save more than one person has an obvious advantage for perpetuation of the species. So in one sense, this is the story of the evolution of altruism, how it advances to empathy, compassion, and eventually to love and spirituality. The definition of altruism is the selfless concern for the well-being of others. And selfless often involves sacrifice. 2.5 million years ago, a proto-human called Homo habilis, handy human, began altering stones to create tools with which they could butcher the animals of their hunt. By the end of their 600,000-year reign, they had improved the shape of their tools somewhat, but the tools remained primitive. However, their bodies had evolved. The pelvis had shifted to a more vertical alignment to better accommodate walking upright. The brain had increased from the size of a chimpanzee's, about 350 cubic centimeters, to about 900 cubic centimeters. And their height had increased from a mere 4 feet 4 inches to an even 5 foot. Anthropologists, citing these advantages, renamed the species Homo erectus, which reigned for another 1.7 billion years. This species continued to evolve, ending its reign with a 1,300 cubic centimeter brain, about twice that of a chimpanzee's, and which our volume is today. They had shorter arms, their bow legs had straightened, and they were about 5 foot 8 inches tall. During this period, Homo erectus learned to manage fire, to cook, to cut and sew hides for clothing, and to greatly improve the shape and utility of their tools. Finally, we have the last 200,000-year period. Anthropologists granted us the title of Homo sapiens, the wise and knowing human. And this period is divided into two main parts. The first 100,000 years we are known as archaic Homo sapiens, and the last 100,000 years we are known as modern Homo sapiens. A segment within modern Homo sapiens, the last 10,000 years, we are generously known as civilization. It is within this last 100,000 years that most of the significant advances were made. The main advancement was the development and refinement of speech and language. This enabled us to organize and plan our main exodus from Africa to Europe and Western Asia. But tools and weapons were also an essential part of that migration and resettlement. The bow and arrow, the stone-tipped spear, and the atlatl, a spear leveraging device, were invented. The atlatl greatly increased the spear's velocity and distance, which enabled safer hunting of large animals and increased the weight of meat gained with each hunt, which allowed more time for inventing, jewelry making, cave painting, and socializing. Another important discovery was the division of labor and the co-evolving of specialists to provide high efficiency for those labor categories. We depend on such division of work today in fields such as medicine, manufacturing, music, sports, and so on. The example of altruistic sacrifice, as noted in the anecdote about the soldier who fell on a grenade, dates back 40 million years to the ants. The ant colony is radically altruistic. The queen sacrifices her mobility in order to serve the colony as its solitary egg layer. The males die after performing their single impregnation of the queen. All other colony females have lost their ability to have offspring. They are the house cleaners, servants of the queen, foragers for all the food, and even the warriors in the event that the colony is attacked. All of these sacrifices are mindless in the sense that bees have no choice. They act as if controlled by a single colony brain. So is this ancient form of altruism a kind of morality? For the ants, it probably is, but only in the sense that each contribution to the colony helps its members survive. There's no thought of right or wrong, good or bad, but remember, altruism is selfless concern for the well-being of others. And concern involves conscious thought, the ability to decide for or against an action. Ants do not appear to have this ability. Now let's skip from the ants 40 million years ago to humans 2.5 million years ago, the beginning of the Stone Age. Since very little sophisticated tool development occurred until the era which began 200,000 years ago, we can assume that not much was going on in the evolution of the brain. It's getting bigger, but not much at home there. We were altruistic to the extent that of family support, but until we formed tribes and developed specialized labor and invented highly effective hunting tools, our brains didn't make much of a quantum leap. A recent brain imaging study revealed that there is a strong correlation between tool making and speech, which seems to show the emergence of the modern creative brain. Along with this progress came the evolutionary advancement of altruism. In recent times, the prominent psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg developed a hierarchy of 6 stages of moral development. You have one of those in your order of service. I thought I had one ready to show you, but I guess yeah, here it is. This little hierarchy here. Very interesting correspondence between the stages of development and Unitarian Universalism. Since very little sophistication and tool development occurred until the year 200,000 years ago, we can assume that nothing was much going on in the brain. Covered that. We were altruistic to the extent of family support, but until we formed tribes and developed specialized labor and invented highly effective hunting tools, our brains didn't make much of a change. In recent times, the prominent psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg developed the hierarchy, which I just showed you, 6 stages of development. You have a graphic example of Kohlberg's work in your order of service. Stages 1 and 2 are generally found to apply from around 1-year-old to around 5 or 6 years old. Stages 3 and 4 of level 2 represent the majority of the population today. The first stage of level 3, which contains the idea of social contract, which is a synonym for covenant. I don't think it's an accident that our tribe here at MUUS is covenantal rather than hierarchical. In any event, both stages of level 3 apply to our aspirations as Unitarian Universalists. Kohlberg worked on a stage 7 involving spirituality and possibly love. Unfortunately, he died before publishing it. In any case, I think it's safe to include some of the elements of altruism other than sacrifice in Kohlberg's stages. Justice, egalitarianism, empathy, compassion, spirituality, and love are certainly components of our moral aptitude. Although I would add that spirituality and love are of a higher order than our usual vocabulary of morality. Let's look at justice. Our closest animal relative, the chimpanzee, if a pair of chimps are offered an undisclosed morsel of food, and one receives a plump, juicy grape, but its mate or bonded friend receives a boring carrot, the first chimp will trade its grape for a carrot to resolve justice for the pair. We split off from the chimps about 5 million years ago, so it must be that we've retained and improved on our sense of justice in that immense time span. In his book, The Moral Arc, Michael Shermer tells us of an experiment with 1-year-old babies. A puppet attempted to roll a ball up a ramp. In the first trial, another puppet helped the effort, and in a second trial, another puppet hindered the effort. When offered a choice of which of the puppets the baby would like to have as a toy, they chose the helping puppet every time. So you see, justice is born in us. And now empathy. Empathy is more than sympathy. To be empathetic, we must feel the same emotions as the other person, not merely feel sorry for them. Did we have empathy when we were tribal beings? Well, let me describe an idealistic day in the life of a tribe, let's say about 15,000 years ago. The hunters have returned with an abundance of meat, proud of their success. They cut away the hide, butcher the carcass, and turn it over to the cook. The cook, whose team also gathered carrots, nuts, and berries that day, prepares the spit and roasts the meat. The food is distributed equally to all members of the tribe. That night, around the campfire, perhaps a dog or two at your side, the keeper of the tribe's oral history tells us about the hunt using dramatic gestures and of the heroic spearing of a huge aurochs that attempted to attack the spearman. Empathy is the lubricant of intensive interdependence. Each member, those with even those with menial chores, knew that their work was essential to the tribe's success. The feeling of essential contribution to each other, this living for each other, as the hymn we just sang states it, is the origin of what we now call self-actualization. The hierarchy found among gorillas, chimpanzees, and bonobos, our three distant cousins, was superseded in tribal humans by egalitarian cooperation. The Homo sapiens tribe survived, and the only one of about 8 others that survived. Homo species so far that did. Evolution had once again unwittingly sorted out a winner. In short, tribal life was a life of justice, of willing cooperation, camaraderie, friendship, and love. We read accounts from the 19th century America of men and women, mostly women, who were captured by Native American tribes and refused to return to their families, even when their families found them and pleaded with them. Happiness was the tribal mode, not the boredom, danger, and misery of prairie civilization. No doubt compassion was also an attribute of tribal life. Compassion is sympathy and concern for the suffering and misfortunes of others. Compassion is noble, of course, but concern must exceed even empathy. It must lead us to action and to help the objects of our compassion, whether humans or other animals. I believe it should be placed in Kohlberg's stage 5, and when we act, whether it be in trivial ways, such as being the first to dim our headlights, or in more tangible ways, such as the MUUS program of making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for the homeless, or in more profound ways. That is the highest form of compassion. We are motivated to act, to use Kohlberg's words. We are driven by internal moral principles. I wonder if Kohlberg was aware of our 7 principles here. It sounds like maybe he had a little influence on that. So where does spirituality and love fit in? Love, like compassion, demands action. We can talk all we want to about loving our enemies, but I think that mainly means not aggressively hurting them. True love means serving our mates, our children, and other close kin, and our friends. Respecting, helping, being dedicated to, remaining faithful to, communicating with. These are the attributes of love. And they arose during our independent, self-actualizing days in the tribe. And lastly, spirituality. I divide spirituality into 2 main groups, supernatural spirituality and natural spirituality. I prefer the latter. And I find it mainly in my contemplation of the cosmos and through my observations of animals. We tend to forget that animals have been in place for millions of years when we made our first stone tools. Where are Johnny come lately? Scarlet, the mother cat, was a fully qualified altruist. Her branch of the cat family dates back about 10 million years. I often tell the story of the whale that was entangled in hundreds of pounds of weighted lobster traps and nets. It was discovered off the coast of San Francisco by fishermen who called a rescue service. Several human rescuers volunteered. And seems I've lost a page here. Well, I know the rest of the story. And after about 2 hours, all the netting and the weights were cut away. The whale appeared to depart, swam out a few hundred feet away, and turned in what the rescuers called joyous circles, splashing its tail and just swimming around and around. And it came back and it nudged each of the 6 divers individually as no doubt the way we'll say thanks. And then it swam away. And what a song that whale had to sing when it got back to its relatives and friends.
This has been a presentation of
MUUS,
the Mattituck Unitarian Universalist Society,
honoring the earth and all that is.
Learn more at MUUSCT.org.
Or come by any Sunday. All are welcome.